Hi, I'm Gordon Brickell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com and follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. And of course, on our YouTube channel, make sure to subscribe by hitting the bell and the notification bell. Every week, we interview film professionals to discuss their work. And this is made possible by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. This week, I'm joined by production designer Grant Major, whose work includes all of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Mulan, and most recently, The Power of the Dog and Cowboy Bebop, among many, many other great films. Welcome to the show, Grant.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about Cowboy Bebop because that was a cherished anime for a lot of people. So I'm wondering, how did you get involved with the project, and then how did you go about taking the look of an anime and translating it to the screen for us?
Sure. Look, I was invited to bid for the job on Cowboy Bebop. I was fortunate to get it. I've got to say at the outset that I was invited to do the first 2 episodes, and that was sort of bookended for me with The Power of the Dog. So I had to go from, I had to finish on a particular date to begin work on The Power of the Dog. And the film the series was delayed during that pre-production time. So I actually never got to sort of follow through a lot of my designs. I had to hand the production design work of Power of the Dog over to a colleague of mine. So yeah, I mean, I designed the spaceship and various other pieces of it, but then it was sort of a little bit truncated for me. But as a production designer, being able to get these sorts of jobs are just fantastic because they are, they let you free in a way to be able to really tap into your imagination for these sorts of rather extraordinary sort of environments. But at the same time, there was always the fan base. There was always the expectations of that, and it was sort of we were made very clear. We were made very clear by the production that was our kind of benchmark, really. That we were reproducing the anime in live action. And so we were to quote all the Bebop itself, needed to appear to be the same. We did look very carefully at the anime for all the clues in terms of the architecture, even though, when you're doing something that's physical and kind of real, you do need to sort of fill in a lot of the gaps that the anime doesn't necessarily have in terms of its backgrounds. Yeah. So, a lot of work went into that, kind of making that kind of logical and real from a, you could say, a spaceship design point of view. But yeah, we tried very, very hard to get the planets, the design of the planets and things like that, the way that they hinted at in the anime. There were budget constraints. We don't have an open-ended amount of money to be able to make these things, so we do have to make some practical decisions. And so we had to have less hovering cars, for example, a few less of the sort of vehicles and spaceships that are sort of background, but sort of made and built in that particular kind of thing. We had to sort of find aeroplane parts and helicopter parts that we could then add on to and kludge together these sort of little spaceshipy parts to it to make it into the spaceship. So it was a process, and it was a sort of a formula, and I'm very proud of what we did, but it was pity that it only went to one series. Everyone was geared up to sort of storm straight into the second one, but anyway, never mind.
Well, so how much is when you're doing a production design, like how much is you sitting back and actually drawing things out or using the computer to design what you want, and you getting your hands dirty, or does a lot of that get handed off to like the production crews?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, look, there was a time, I'm pretty old now, but there was a time when I used to do all my own production art, and I used to be very, very good at drawing. And uh, when the projects I get involved with have got larger and larger, there is less and less time to actually physically draw and concept and yeah, do conceptual drawings, I should say, of each sort of bits and pieces. So concept artists are hired for this sort of work. However, I still do my own drawings to start the process going, and I do bring research and all the sort of different elements and sketches and models and things like that to the concept people for them to be able to make what I want to get made. And so they're very, very talented and wonderful people, but they're also like a tool for me. They're a tool to create the production design process, and each of these concept pieces are part of a book of images that make up the entire film. So the production designer does have an overview on all these things, and I do sort of breathe down the neck and look over the shoulder of concept artists and to make sure that I'm getting what I want. They also bring their own ideas sometimes, and I'm very open and collaborative with them to give me kick it around a bit and just show me things that I hadn't thought of before. And so I very much like that sort of creative collaboration that we have to make these things real.
Now, you also worked on Power of the Dog, and this is a very interesting film, and it's sort of, I don't even know how to describe, I guess it's like just at the tail end of the Wild West, right? Like things have been sort of tamed, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term. So how did you guys go about figuring out the look for that film? Because it's not really Western, it's sort of coming to the end of the West, and those little details were in there.
It's a fantastic time period, actually, and we don't see very many films from this period, I don't think. There is equally there's cowboys on this very labor-intensive sort of cattle ranch. But there's trucks that turn up, and there's cars that they drive off on, and there's telephones and and electricity. Recognizing that the technologies of that time period was very much a thing. The situation of the film, though, there's a situation in the film that also reflects a lead up to this. So the Burbank family has been on that piece of land for 40 years.
Yeah.
The house was made in the 1880s, back before there was power and before there was telephone. And so I wanted to make it feel like the power was sort of retrofitted into the house. And so, you can notice the light switches and things like that with the power cords going from them. They haven't been buried in the walls of the house because the house has been built too early for that. And the, things like the boilers and things like that in the kitchens are sort of later additions. And I love that layering of technological sort of timepieces that bring us up to this period. So yeah, I think it's a terrific kind of kind of a classic period of time in a way.
Yeah.
It's when they're almost broken the back of the Wild West. They were already fencing off areas, and large areas have been claimed by farmers and things like that. I mean, the Burbank Ranch was in the book as one of the biggest farms in Montana, and they're one of the wealthiest people that are there. But at the same time, the two boys that run it, Phil and George, are quite they don't really display their wealth so much. They live in this big, huge house, but it's not as though the house is sort of really tidied up and presented to the world. It's just like a working place. So it was all these sort of layers of meaning and back history and things like that I love to be able to bring up to the film.
Well, it's so interesting that you brought up the lights, because that's one of the details I really liked, because I've stayed at a farm that was about 150 to 200 years old, and that's exactly what they would do, is they would retrofit everything and just like run things around. So I think they added air conditioning. It was just sort of sitting on the side, and tubes would go through, and it's just sort of hodgepodge, I guess you could say, or snuck in. How do you figure out what the details should be? I guess, and it's a weird question, but I'm thinking like, in this case, you were like, okay, well, historically you would be adapting the building, but when I watch some of your films, like I think about Lord of the Rings or King Kong or something, like how do you figure out these details that you want to put in that sort of make it more real for us? How do you go about researching that?
Mm. Well, a lot of it is, to me, my language, and professionally, is images. And I do love to saturate myself in images before, research images, you could say, before I actually get to put pencil to paper. So, by the time I come to a thing like, particularly something that is from a from a real piece of cultural history, like Power of the Dog, there's a lot of visual photographs from that era. Evelyn Cameron is one photographer that we look very carefully at, because her, not only were her photographs very characterful of the time and the place, but also, they had enough resolution in them to really look at the photographs and pick out details. You can pick out a lot of really interesting everyday things that may be overlooked normally, but they're there. And I remember doing the same with King Kong. When I was doing that with Peter Jackson, there was a photographer who had gone around all the New York streets for some bureaucratic reason, photographed every single building in that Manhattan area. So there's this massive archive of imagery to look at and really, really study. And I remember Peter was so enthused about these things that he said, okay, let's do a count up of every person in these photographs so that we can put the same amount of extras in our images to make it feel like there's the same population on the streets of New York at the same time. So those sorts of kind of obscure kind of details are really, really good for me. And it makes it real. It makes these things real, because rather than just relying just on imagination, we've got this really great material to work from.
So where do you go, when you're not on the films, where do you go for inspiration? Like, is there a particular style of art that you really follow, or a particular photographer that you really like?
Yeah, well, it's a good one, because in show business generally, and me in particular, I just devote myself to this job as it's more than just a job. it's a life, and every sort of moment of my life is to do with design, and to do with looking, and to do with sort of recognizing good design and interesting new ideas and interesting sort of juxtapositions and things like this. What I do personally, I do a lot of browsing on the internet professionally, and I collect a huge amount of images. Whenever I see an images, it's a snapshot. And I've got hard drives full of snapshots that I've just grazed over the years. And obviously, I've got books, but this is just one of two libraries I've got in the house, and this is the small one. So I've collected all these things that when you read books, I just kind of remember the images in the books, and I remember particular books so I can go to them. So, in short, my imagination and my mind is full of a library of things that I like and possibilities. So I do tend to trawl through these in my spare time, and then when I'm working, I find that I can remember things that often sort of just mating together various different images that could make up an original idea. Things like that.
Is there a particular, because like I remember in university studying like the Bauhaus and studying like modernism and stuff. Is there a particular art movement or architecture style that you gravitate towards personally?
Yeah, I do naturally go towards modernism because I'm a fan of modernism, and I do, when I go to LA, which is on those rare occasions, I go and visit the Schindler House and some of these architectural pieces that are left over from that time. Study Frank Lloyd Wright and the origins of it, and all that those sorts of people. So if I was to choose one, it'll be that, but I don't like to think that it's that only, because I do appreciate all these beautiful architectural and design phases that we've had in our history. They are all individually really, really interesting to me, and reflective of sort of culture and things.
Now, I'm very interested, and this is totally off topic, but have you ever been to the Hearst Castle between LA and San Francisco?
No, I haven't. No, my dad went all those years ago. He says you've got to go, but I've never had the opportunity to
It
go up
is,
there. Okay.
I would be fascinated to hear, I would be fascinated to hear you just talk about it and see what you're seeing, because essentially after World War One, Hearst realized he could go and buy architecture pieces, artwork, all this stuff from around the world really cheaply because places were trying to rebuild. So he would go to a church and buy their ceiling. He would go to, Italy and buy columns and stuff. So like the whole place is sort of, I guess, for a pastiche of different architecture styles, different artworks, different things. So I'd be fascinated if you ever go to record that experience and hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, sounds fascinating. Yeah, indeed.
Now, I would love to know, because one of the films that you worked on that I absolutely loved was Frighteners.
Huh.
And that was very early in the VFX world, and they really pushed boundaries with the visual effects in there. And nowadays when you're working, they're doing a lot of set extensions and things like that. So what's your working relationship with the visual effects industry? Like, how do you approach working with them, I guess?
Yeah, it's interesting, eh? Like that period, like around the turn of the century, the late 1990s and the early 2000s, just was a revolution in that, and I was sort of very much part of that changeover. But the film industry has had these kind of big radical sort of technological upgrades, you could say, oftentimes. But look. To me, it's as a production designer, my job hasn't changed that much. You'd think it would have, and I guess in some ways it has. Actually, haven't said that. We used to build sets, and there was only sets. We used to build more sets because to give the camera some flexibility to be able to explore the space, we had to build all that, or in a location that allowed for all that. And of course, now that's sort of less and less the case. Also, the way that the shots are constructed now are often done with layers of input, and the art department does build pieces and other pieces and background pieces and location pieces, and they get sort of built into the one sort of shot. But at the same time, the design of a film is an overarching kind of thing for me. It is still a time and a place and a dramatic instance and a story, a narrative story that's being told. So all those sorts of things are still, part of the overall sort of film construction. So yeah, the visual effects to me are a tool, and it's we do a lot of conceptualizing of the visual effects shots in the art department too, and I sort of very aggressively hold on to those, because it's a thing that can easily get bumped to post-production. We'll forget about that. We'll sort of do it later on. But no, I do like to be able to build the entire production design of the film in pre-production, and sometimes sort of stagger into production itself, so that we can stand back and look at the entire film, every shot of the, or every key shot of the film. Has been thought through and conceptualized, and so yeah, it's an interesting time. I mean, it does allow for broader scope, as you're probably well aware, but it's sometimes a bit of a stumbling block, because I think that visual effects can sometimes not really feel like it's belonging to a film. If it's let go, if it's off the reins, you could say, it sometimes goes a bit wild, and it can be a little bit too overpowering. So to me, it's the story, the narrative of the story, and the complexities and psychologies and interactions of the characters is what we go to those movies to see. And the big wild computer generated landscapes have got to fit into that.
It's funny that you would say, oh, they want to do it in post, because as someone who's worked in post, a lot of times we'll get something and be like, why didn't you do that in pre-production, or why didn't you do that on set? Because it would have been so much easier.
Yeah.
Now you've done a lot of work with Peter Jackson and And I'm always interested in seeing how people develop those long-term relationships with other crew members or directors, with editors or production designers. How did you guys meet, and how do you guys like, I guess, how did you work with him and sort of develop that relationship?
Yeah. Look, it's a highlight of my life, working with Peter back in that period of time. When we first met, we were both Kiwis, both New Zealanders, and we were both earlier in our careers, obviously. I was very thrilled that Peter's producer at the time contacted me to see if I was interested in doing Heavenly Creatures. It was back then, because I knew of Peter, but not. I didn't know him. He lived in a different city, in a different part of the country, and his reputation was very much a sort of a splattermeister. He's kind of like blood and gore and humor and kind of outrageous kind of action like that. Is that the sort of movies I was interested in? I'm not quite sure. I'm a sort of a sensitive drama sort of person. I tend to gravitate towards things like that. But I read the script, and I was really thrilled that he asked me to collaborate on it, and we got on really well. We're both very much friends back then, and in fact, even when he was touring me around his own world in a way in Wellington, where he still lives, and Richard Taylor back then was kind of another mate of his, and there was this very makey thing going on with the having done the Meet the Feebles and Brain Dead and things like that. So they had these little workshops where all these little boffins, if you like, were sort of making all these models and blood kind of pumps and all that sort of stuff. So, it's really interesting to look into that world, to their world of a handmade kind of film thing. So, we, to get back to your question, we sort of spent enough time with each other doing Heavenly Creatures and then the Frighteners, and I can't remember if there's anything else in between, and then Lord of the Rings, growing together in a way, and exploring these new horizons together, exploring visual effects together, and so the Frighteners did at the time have the most visual effects of any film that had been made before. I can't remember it exactly, like 30 or 40 shots, or maybe 300 shots. I can't quite remember now, but it was a huge amount, and he had bought 2 Silicon Graphics computers and was just making it up as he went along, just like filmmaking generally, teaching them, him and George Port, who was the visual effects supervisor on that, just really were exploring what you can do with this machine and then building it into this production. So, Peter's always been very inventive like that, and very, imaginative and very businesslike in how he goes about doing these things. So to be able to grow during a career with a person like that is just it's a gift, and it's the same with Nikki Caro. My relationship with Nikki Caro goes all the way back to, I've done about 5 films with her now, since she was, in fact, my first working relationship with her was when she was still at art school. Now she's a high-flying sort of Hollywood director. So, I'm it's just a thrill to be able to hang out with people on the upward trajectory, you could say. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Is there a particular design that you're most proud of, or that was really difficult for you to achieve but you were able to pull it off?
Well, that's quite a hard question, really, because this is a very risky business, filmmaking. You really put your balls on the line, you could say. It's being asked to produce these things that have never been done before on a daily basis is quite a big deal. And the ambition of a lot of filmmakers to be able to make visuals that are going to wow people is often falls to the art department to sort of, okay, off you go, go and do it. I find it hard to remember all the sort of instances. I suppose some of the bigger sets in King Kong, Peter was very much he was so much into set building and set design back then, and everything needed to be sort of in camera and in the studio. He didn't even really go outside at all to the locations for that. So we were building these huge forested locations in the studio as sets, and they were very complex. And then all the geography required for the dinosaurs, which then were all computer generated and were all prevised at the time. And Peter wanted to copy those previs sequences exactly in the studio. So it's almost we were retrofitting a lot of the shapes and hills and mountains and tracks and trails in those forest sequences to something digital that had already been created. And it was a very kind of exciting, risky, and sort of they were good times looking back on them, but they were also terrifying times probably at the time. Yeah.
What I have one last question for you, and we've been stuck in this pandemic for so long, and a lot of people have turned to streaming services for entertainment when they're stuck inside. Is there a movie or show you've discovered over the last year that people should check out?
Yeah, well, look, it may be a bit of an obvious choice because it's actually quite a highly rated series. I've been watching Succession, like almost holding on to the TV monitor as I watch it, because it's so wonderful piece of drama. I watch every episode twice, and I when I first sort of discovered it, it had already been the first two series had already kind of happened, so I binge watched those, and now I unfortunately the third series has come to an end, and I'm kind of on withdrawal at the moment. But I found that it's not a big production design. It does have some good production design in it, but it's not a sort of a fantasy thing or anything like that. It's just the straight drama, the shit talk that these people say to each other, the family dynamics, and it's just a very entertaining character piece. I love it.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check out filmmakeru.com for all our new courses. And of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I want to thank you again, Grant, for joining us. And of course, our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.